Jade Winters sank into her office chair, exhausted but resolute. She stared at the blinking cursor on her screen, forcing herself to focus, but her mind replayed every snide comment and condescending look from that day. Working at Dillon & Co., a luxury fashion brand known for its exclusivity and glamour, felt like wading through a sea of perfectly curated social media profiles. Everyone here was lean, stylish, and seemingly flawless, a world away from the person Jade saw in the mirror. Jade had joined Dillon & Co.'s right out of college, driven by her passion for creative design and marketing. She loved fashion, not because she fit its stereotype, but because she believed in its power to tell stories. She poured her heart into every project, working late into the night, creating detailed presentations, and brainstorming unique ideas to set Dillon & Co. apart. Yet, despite her efforts, she was invisible, disregarded in meetings, and overlooked for promotions. A big part of her frustration centered on her boss, Dylan Frost. Tall, impeccably dressed, and with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, Dylan embodied everything Jade despised and was inexplicably drawn to. He was sharp, ambitious, and a magnet for attention. As the CEO of Dillon & Co., he set high standards, often impossible ones. But his greatest flaw wasn't his perfectionism, it was his utter lack of empathy. Dylan Frost had an air of superiority that he didn't bother hiding, treating his employees as mere instruments to further his brand. He had a talent for pinpointing insecurities and wielding them like a weapon. Jade had been on the receiving end of his barbed remarks more times than she could count, but it was his recent joke that broke her patience. At the latest company mixer, Dylan had seen her near the dessert table. She hadn't even touched a thing, just stood there chatting with a colleague when he walked over with a glass of champagne and a smirk. "Oh, Jade," he drawled, his voice carrying across the room. "You really can't resist these events, can you? You know, some of us like to keep the sweets to a minimum." She felt her face flush, mortified. The jab was clear enough for everyone nearby to catch it, and Jade had wanted nothing more than to melt into the floor. For years, she'd dealt with cruel remarks about her weight, sometimes from strangers, sometimes even from people she trusted. But this? From her own boss, in front of her colleagues? It stung deeper than she'd expected. That night, she went home, brushed off the tears, and stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. She didn't want to feel ashamed for the way she looked, and she certainly didn't want to give Dylan the satisfaction of thinking he'd broken her spirit. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who'd ever been belittled, everyone who'd felt small in a world that prized appearances over substance. For the first time, Jade felt a shift within herself, a fire kindling where there'd only been quiet acceptance. She would not let Dylan get away with treating people this way. If he thought he could shame her, he was sorely mistaken. The next morning, Jade walked into the office, her mind still replaying the humiliating moment from the night before. She could feel her cheeks burning whenever she thought about Dylan's smirk and the way he had effortlessly turned her into the punchline of his cruel joke. She pushed open the glass doors of Dillon & Co., taking a deep breath as she stepped inside. The lobby was sleek and modern, all white marble floors and minimalist decor, designed to make visitors feel they were entering the epitome of luxury. But to Jade, it felt cold, unwelcoming. She moved briskly through the space, keeping her head down as she passed colleagues who seemed to embody every stereotype of the fashion industry. Tall, slender, flawlessly dressed. It was a stark contrast to her curvier frame and vibrant wardrobe, choices she made to express herself rather than fit in. Arriving at her desk, she set down her bag and pulled out her laptop, determined to distract herself with work. She had a presentation to prepare for the next product launch, a task she normally enjoyed. But today, her thoughts kept drifting back to Dylan. His words rang in her ears, laced with disdain and arrogance. What bothered her most was how he'd assumed he could get away with it, that she wouldn't dare to retaliate or stand up for herself. That presumption of power, the unspoken belief that he could say whatever he wanted without consequence, grated on her. She had always prided herself on her resilience, her ability to brush off petty comments. But this time it was different. This time she felt compelled to take a stand. Jade opened a blank document on her computer, intending to jot down notes for the presentation. But instead, she found herself typing a list of grievances. Every snide remark, every dismissive gesture, every time he'd taken credit for her work or belittled her in meetings. By the time she finished, the document had grown into a manifesto of sorts, detailing every way Dylan had disrespected her and others. And with each item she wrote, a plan began to take shape. This wouldn't be an impulsive act of revenge. It would be a calculated effort, something that would slowly dismantle his carefully crafted image. Dylan Frost was untouchable in his own mind, but she knew better. She'd been his right-hand strategist long enough to understand his vulnerabilities, to know the weaknesses he kept hidden beneath the polished surface. That evening, Jade stayed late at the office, going over her plan. She wouldn't need to shout or stage a dramatic confrontation. No, she would play this game with finesse, with subtlety. Her revenge would be quiet, almost invisible, but effective, and it would begin with a carefully planned attack on his public image. Dylan was known for his charm, his reputation as a stylish and successful CEO, an influencer in the industry. His followers adored him, his clients trusted him, and his peers envied him. But Jade knew that his social persona was just that, a persona. Beneath the surface, he was self-centered, oblivious to the needs of others, and ruthless in his pursuit of success. All she had to do was shed a little light on that truth. She created an anonymous social media account that night, choosing a handle that was innocuous enough to avoid suspicion, but intriguing enough to draw attention. She started posting small hints, sharing stories about an unnamed CEO in the fashion industry who treated his employees with disdain and viewed people as disposable. Nothing specific enough to identify Dylan, but enough to create a spark of curiosity. Over the next week, she posted stories that grew gradually more detailed, each one highlighting a different aspect of his character. She described his tendency to take credit for others' work, his frequent belittling of employees, and even the way he dismissed sustainable practices in favor of cheaper production. She crafted each post carefully, ensuring it was believable but vague. And she watched with satisfaction as the account gained followers, and people began speculating about the identity of the mystery CEO. At work, Jade maintained a calm facade, interacting with Dylan as professionally as ever. She continued to fulfill her duties diligently, delivering high-quality work that kept her under the radar. She knew he would never suspect her. In his mind, she was too meek, too obedient to ever challenge him. And that was his first mistake. But behind the scenes, Jade relished the quiet victories. She noticed Dylan's frustration as rumors began to swirl. He grew tense, his usual confidence wavering as he tried to brush off the online speculation. He snapped at his employees more frequently, his polished demeanor cracking under the pressure. One afternoon, she found herself alone in the conference room with him. Dylan was pacing, his jaw clenched as he muttered about the baseless slander circulating on social media. "Can you believe this?" he asked, glancing at Jade with exasperation. "Some coward out there has decided to smear my reputation, and for what? Jealousy? Envy? I mean, it's pathetic." Jade feigned concern, nodding sympathetically. "It must be hard to deal with unfounded accusations like that," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. He let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. "You're one of the few people I can count on here, Jade. At least you're loyal. You'd never stoop to something so petty." She almost laughed at the irony, but managed to keep her composure. "Of course, Dylan," she said with a reassuring smile. "I'm here to help in any way I can." That evening, Jade sat back at her desk, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. The plan was working, and she could already see the impact. But she wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning, a warning shot. Dylan Frost was about to learn that actions had consequences, and she intended to be the one teaching him that lesson. Jade's satisfaction grew with each passing day, as Dylan's frustration became more evident. The whisper of rumors, the small inconveniences, the pressure mounting on him, it was all part of her carefully orchestrated plan. But she knew that whispers and rumors alone wouldn't be enough. If she wanted to truly make an impact, she'd need to take her plan a step further. At work, Jade began to assert her intelligence and skills in subtle ways that made Dylan's weaknesses more obvious. While Dylan was brilliant in public relations and loved being the charismatic face of Dylan & Co., his understanding of logistics and back-end processes was minimal. And this was where Jade saw an opportunity. For months, she had done most of the behind-the-scenes work that kept their projects on track. She made sure orders arrived on time, that each collection launch was perfectly coordinated, and that client accounts were meticulously managed. Dylan took all the credit, often presenting her work as his own to the board and clients. But Jade had realized her power in this knowledge, the control she could wield by adjusting just a few things. She started making small mistakes that only Dylan would notice, and that he would be unable to fix without her. Missing a small deadline here, misplacing a file there. She was careful not to impact the company or the clients, just enough to make Dylan feel the weight of his dependency on her. The first time he noticed, he called her into his office. "Jade," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose, "you've been slipping up lately. We missed the shipment date for the new sample collection, and the client is unhappy." She nodded, keeping her face innocent and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Dylan. With the new workload, it's been a bit challenging to keep track of everything." He sighed, clearly annoyed but uncertain how to address it without revealing his own ignorance of the logistical side of things. "I expect better from you. Don't let it happen again." "Yes, of course," she replied sweetly, fighting back a smile as she left his office. She could see the frustration building in his eyes, the small cracks in his composure widening with each minor misstep. Outside the office, Jade's anonymous social media campaign grew bolder. She started crafting posts that hinted at Dylan's personal vanity, his obsession with control, and his blatant disregard for the hard work of his employees. Her posts were clever, framed as insider stories, from someone who worked in the fashion industry and had witnessed the toxic environment firsthand. With each post, the account's followers increased, and speculation intensified. Some people began connecting the dots, guessing it could be about Dylan & Co. The comments section filled with whispers of Dylan's true character, his facade starting to fracture in the eyes of his audience. One post, in particular, struck a nerve. Jade wrote a story about a boss who publicly humiliated his employees using a real-life example of a company event where he mocked an employee in front of everyone. It was a thinly veiled retelling of her own experience, and she watched with satisfaction as comments flooded in from people who were appalled by the story. "Who treats people like this?" one user wrote. "Imagine having that kind of power and using it to tear others down." "Disgusting," said another. Jade could feel the shift. She had planted seeds of doubt, and people were beginning to question the polished image Dylan had worked so hard to maintain. And yet, Dylan remained unaware that she was the one behind it all. She could see the tension building in him each day as his reputation wavered, as the line between reality and perception blurred. But Jade's plan wasn't only professional. She wanted him to feel the sting of isolation, to understand what it was like to be on the outside. She knew Dylan prided himself on his social circle, the elite events, the connections he boasted about constantly, so she decided to target those. One evening, she used her anonymous account to reach out to several prominent influencers and stylists connected to Dylan & Co., suggesting that they might want to look deeper into the rumors about the company's CEO. She hinted at issues in the workplace culture, at the toxic behaviors that had been rumored for years. She knew that in the world of high fashion, reputation was everything, and once tarnished, it was nearly impossible to restore. She watched as a few of those influencers began to subtly distance themselves from Dylan's company. A few canceled meetings, others postponed collaborations. Dylan noticed, of course, and his frustration only deepened. In private, he began questioning his team, trying to understand why the brand's public favor seemed to be slipping. He looked to Jade for answers, oblivious to the fact that she was the orchestrator of it all. "Jade, I need you to look into this. I feel like there's some kind of campaign against me, something I can't see," he confided one afternoon. his usual arrogance softened by a rare hint of vulnerability. Jade looked him straight in the eyes, her face a mask of empathy. "I'll do everything I can to help," she promised, even as she relished the irony of her words. She knew exactly what was happening, and she was watching her plan unfold perfectly. But as the weeks passed, Jade began to notice something unexpected. Dylan seemed genuinely troubled, not just by the impact on his reputation, but by a sense of self-doubt she hadn't expected. One evening, she overheard him talking quietly on the phone, his voice lacking its usual bravado. "I don't know what I did to deserve this," he murmured. "I try to keep this company running, but somehow I feel like I'm failing. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought." Jade was taken aback. She had wanted to see him suffer, to strip away his arrogance and make him understand the harm he'd caused. But she hadn't anticipated this hint of insecurity, the softening of his usually impenetrable shell. It stirred something in her, a flicker of sympathy she wasn't prepared for. She brushed the feeling aside, reminding herself of the pain he had caused her and countless others. But as she continued her plan, she found herself watching him more closely, noticing the small changes in his behavior. He seemed quieter, more introspective. He stopped making the snide comments he'd once tossed around so freely, and he even thanked her on several occasions for her work. A small gesture, but one that hinted at a shift in his attitude. For the first time, Jade questioned her own motivations. Was she truly seeking justice? Or had her plan become more about revenge than she'd intended? She tried to shake off the doubt, but it lingered, a nagging whisper in the back of her mind. Jade's quiet revenge campaign continued, but the effects of her actions were becoming more visible, even to those around her. Dylan, once a picture of arrogant self-assurance, was now a shadow of his former self. His once sleek image had begun to fray at the edges, his temper shorter and his smile rarer. Rumors floated in the office, whispers from employees who speculated on his recent losses in influence and industry standing. In meetings, he seemed distracted, struggling to focus on even the simplest tasks. His carefully curated relationships with influencers and major clients were becoming strained, as more of them subtly distanced themselves, declining his invitations and postponing collaborations. And as if the loss of his public image weren't enough, his leadership within Dylan & Co. was suffering too. Morale among his employees, already strained, took another dive as everyone sensed something was wrong. Jade knew she was pushing him toward a breaking point, and for weeks she had reveled in it. But something was shifting in her as well. She couldn't ignore the small changes she saw in him. He looked worn down, almost defeated, his eyes betraying exhaustion and self-doubt. And though she kept telling herself that he deserved it, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort each time she saw him struggling. Then came the day when everything came to a head. One afternoon, as Jade was heading back to her desk, she heard her name called sharply from Dylan's office. She turned to see him standing at his door, his expression unreadable. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't expected him to confront her so directly, but she kept her face neutral, her voice calm as she walked over. "Come in, Jade," he said, stepping back to let her enter. Once inside, he closed the door behind her, a heavy silence settling over the room. Dylan didn't sit at his desk, but instead leaned against it, arms crossed as he regarded her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She could feel his eyes on her, a look of frustration mixed with something she couldn't quite identify. "Jade," he began, his voice measured but tense, "I think we both know there's been tension in the office lately, rumors, disruptions in our usual workflow. I'm not blind to it." Jade kept her face impassive, choosing her words carefully. "Tension is common in high-pressure environments, Dylan. It's part of working in a fast-paced industry." He narrowed his eyes, clearly unsatisfied with her response. "This isn't just about high pressure, and you know it. There's been a noticeable shift recently. People aren't responding to me the way they used to, and I can't help but feel like you might know something about it." Jade's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected him to confront her so directly, but she held her ground, her voice steady as she met his gaze. "Are you suggesting that I'm responsible for whatever shift you're experiencing?" Dylan let out a frustrated sigh, raking a hand through his hair. "I'm not suggesting anything, Jade. I just want to understand what's going on. Lately it feels like I'm fighting against something I can't even see. It's as if my entire world is unraveling and I have no idea why." For the first time, she saw something raw in his expression, a vulnerability he rarely showed. And despite herself, she felt a pang of empathy. But she reminded herself of the pain he'd caused her, the humiliation he'd inflicted so effortlessly. He deserved this. "Maybe," she said softly, "this is a sign that something needs to change. Maybe it's time to look at how you've treated the people around you." He frowned, clearly taken aback by her bluntness. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jade held his gaze, her voice unwavering. "It means that you can't build an empire on other people's backs without consequence. You can't expect loyalty and respect from people you treat as disposable. Maybe what you're feeling is the result of the way you've treated others." Dylan looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "I know I'm not perfect," he muttered, almost to himself. "I know I push people too hard sometimes. But this feels different. It feels like someone is out to get me." For a moment, Jade almost felt compelled to reveal the truth, to admit that she was the one orchestrating his downfall. But something stopped her. She wanted him to understand, to truly feel the impact of his actions. And she knew he wasn't there yet. "Maybe," she said instead, "you need to start by looking in the mirror." He didn't respond, his expression thoughtful as he watched her. She could see the internal struggle in his eyes, the first cracks in his arrogant exterior. And in that moment, she felt a small glimmer of satisfaction, knowing that she had planted a seed of doubt, a hint of self-awareness that would continue to grow. In the days following their confrontation, Jade noticed a change in Dylan's behavior. It was subtle at first, a thank you here, a polite request there. He seemed more aware of his words, more considerate in his interactions. And while she initially dismissed it as a temporary shift, something designed to save face, she couldn't ignore the growing sincerity in his actions. One morning, she arrived at the office to find a small note on her desk. "Jade, thank you for your hard work and dedication. I know I don't say it often, but I appreciate everything you do." Dylan. She stared at the note, her emotions a confusing mixture of satisfaction and reluctance. Part of her wanted to crumple it up, to remind herself that it was all part of her plan, that his remorse couldn't undo the years of belittling and dismissiveness. But another part, a quieter, softer part, felt something stir, a tiny flicker of hope that maybe he was changing. As the days went on, Dylan continued his efforts. He began joining his employees for lunch in the break room, something he'd never done before, and he started attending team meetings without dominating the conversation. Jade watched as he listened to others' ideas, nodding thoughtfully, even offering words of encouragement. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, he pulled her aside. "Jade," he said, his tone uncharacteristically earnest, "I wanted to apologize for the way I've treated you and others here. I realize now that I've been too focused on my own goals, my own success. I didn't stop to think about the people who make it all possible." She felt her heart skip a beat, caught off guard by his honesty. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. This was the apology she had wanted, the acknowledgement she had craved. But it felt strange, coming from a man she had spent so long resenting. I appreciate that, Dylan," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, his gaze sincere. "I know I can't undo the past, but I want to change, and I know it's going to take time to prove that I mean it." Jade nodded, unsure of what else to say. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the genuine desire to become a better person. And despite her best efforts to remain detached, to hold on to her anger, she felt her resolve beginning to waver. That evening, as she walked home, Jade found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She had set out to teach Dylan a lesson, to make him understand the impact of his actions. And somehow, in the process, she had seen him transform, seen him evolve from the arrogant boss she once despised into someone capable of empathy, of self-reflection. She realized that her plan for revenge had morphed into something unexpected. Instead of tearing him down, she had inadvertently helped him grow, and while part of her still held on to the hurt he had caused, another part, one she hadn't acknowledged before, felt a strange sense of connection to him, a bond forged through pain, growth, and unexpected forgiveness. For the first time, she wondered if her ultimate goal had been achieved, if perhaps the real victory lay not in revenge, but in change. As Dylan's sincerity became more apparent, Jade found herself wrestling with emotions she hadn't anticipated. Her feelings were a confusing blend of satisfaction, guilt, and something unexpected, a warmth she had never felt toward him before. She had spent so long resenting him, viewing him as nothing more than a self-absorbed boss, that she hadn't prepared for the possibility that he could change, or that she might feel something for him beyond resentment. One evening, the entire team gathered at a local bar to celebrate the successful launch of a new collection. Normally, Dylan would have left early, maintaining his professional distance. But tonight he lingered, chatting with employees and making an effort to get to know them personally. His laugh echoed across the room, genuine and unguarded, as he shared stories and jokes with the team. Jade watched him from across the room, noticing the shift in his demeanor. He seemed lighter, more human, as if he were shedding a burden he had carried for far too long. When their eyes met, he smiled, a warmth in his gaze that left her momentarily breathless. He walked over, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, and offered one to her. "To a job well done," he said, clinking his glass against hers. "To a job well done," she echoed, taking a sip. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the rest of the team laughing and mingling. After a moment, Dylan spoke, his tone thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like you're living a life that isn't really yours?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the glass in his hand. Jade looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I think we all go through phases where we question our choices. The important thing is finding a way to align your life with your values." He nodded, his expression contemplative. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. For years I convinced myself that success was all that mattered, that as long as I was winning, nothing else was important. But now, I'm not so sure." She felt a pang of empathy, realizing that behind his arrogance and bravado, he was just as lost and searching as anyone else. "Maybe success isn't about what you achieve alone, but about what you build with others," she offered gently. He looked at her, something shifting in his gaze, a depth she hadn't seen before. "You're a remarkable person, Jade," he said quietly. "I've taken you for granted, and I'm sorry. I want you to know that." Her heart fluttered, caught off guard by his words. She had spent so long hating him, resenting every harsh word and dismissive glance, yet here he was, opening up to her, expressing a genuine apology. She searched his eyes, looking for any hint of insincerity, but found none. In that moment, she felt the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack. They continued talking, sharing stories about their lives, their childhoods, their dreams. She told him about her love for design, about the times she had stayed up late, sketching fashion concepts that she was too afraid to share. He listened intently, genuinely interested, and for the first time, she felt seen. As the evening wore on, they found themselves alone, the rest of the team having dispersed. The bar was quiet now, the soft hum of music filling the air. They stood by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, their shoulders almost touching. "I don't think I've ever met anyone quite like you," Dylan murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Jade looked up at him, her heart pounding. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the unspoken vulnerability he was sharing with her. And in that moment, she realized that her feelings had shifted from mere satisfaction at his downfall to something deeper, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Before she could respond, he took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Jade. I know I've been awful to you. But I want to make it right. I want to be someone worthy of your respect." Her breath hitched, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion and longing. She wanted to hate him, wanted to cling to the resentment that had fueled her for so long. But standing here, with his hand in hers and his eyes filled with sincerity, she felt something shift, something she couldn't ignore. I think you're already on your way," she whispered, her voice barely audible. They stood there in silence, the unspoken words hanging between them, the possibility of something more, something unexpected. Over the next few weeks, Jade and Dylan grew closer, their connection deepening with each shared moment. They spent more time together, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. Dylan became a regular presence in her life, stopping by her office to discuss projects, asking for her input, even joining her for lunch. His arrogance had softened, replaced by a gentleness that she found herself drawn to. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Dylan suggested they grab dinner together. Jade agreed, and they found themselves at a cozy, dimly lit Italian restaurant, sharing pasta and laughter over glasses of wine. As they talked, Dylan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His touch sent a thrill through her, a warmth that spread from her fingertips to her heart. "Jade," he said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "I never thought I could feel this way about someone. You've changed me, in ways I didn't know I needed. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." Her heart pounded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had started this journey with a plan for revenge, a way to make him pay for the pain he'd caused. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. She had seen the man behind the arrogance, the vulnerability beneath the facade, and she couldn't deny the feelings that had grown in her heart. I don't want to lose this either," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned across the table, his face inches from hers. "Then let's take a chance," he murmured. "Let's see where this goes." She hesitated, the doubts swirling in her mind. Could she truly forgive him for the past? Could she open herself up to the possibility of love with the man who had once been the source of her pain? But as she looked into his eyes, filled with sincerity and vulnerability, she felt her heart answering for her. "Yes," she whispered, a smile tugging at her lips. "Let's take a chance." He smiled, a warmth spreading across his face, and in that moment, she knew that this was the start of something new, something beautiful. Their relationship blossomed, growing from tentative steps into something deeper, more profound. Jade found herself opening up to him, sharing parts of herself she had kept hidden for so long. And Dylan, in turn, showed her a side of himself that few had seen, a side that was caring, considerate, even selfless. But as their bond deepened, Jade knew she couldn't keep her secret forever. She had to tell him the truth about her original plan, about the revenge she had orchestrated. The thought terrified her, but she knew that if they were going to build something real, it had to be built on honesty. One evening, as they sat together on the couch in her apartment, she took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Dylan, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice trembling. He looked at her, his expression soft but concerned. "What is it?" She hesitated, the weight of her confession pressing down on her. But she forced herself to continue. "When you made that joke about me, in front of everyone, it hurt. It hurt more than I can say. And I was angry. So angry that I decided to get back at you. I started the rumors, the posts online, everything." His expression shifted, a mixture of shock and sadness filling his eyes. For a moment, he said nothing, and the silence hung heavy between them. "Jade," he said finally, his voice soft. "Why? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked down, guilt flooding her. "I wanted to hurt you, to make you feel the way you made me feel. But somewhere along the way, I saw that you were changing, that you were becoming someone I could care about." Dylan took a deep breath, his expression thoughtful. "I can't say it doesn't hurt to know that, but I understand. I was awful to you, and I deserved it. Maybe this was what I needed to change." She looked up, relief washing over her. "Can you forgive me?" He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Yes," he said softly, "because you taught me how to be a better person, and I don't want to lose you." Tears filled her eyes, and in that moment she felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a new hope, a new beginning. In the weeks that followed Jade's confession, her relationship with Dylan only deepened. They had both bared their souls, confronted their pasts, and emerged stronger for it. The honesty between them, forged through pain and vulnerability, became the bedrock of something lasting and real. What had begun as a complex, tumultuous dynamic now blossomed into a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. At the office, their relationship brought about subtle but significant changes. Dylan, once known for his demanding, detached leadership, became a more accessible and empathetic boss. He started holding regular meetings with his teams, asking for input from every level, taking time to understand the challenges his employees faced. The impact was immediate. People began to feel valued, seen, and appreciated, and the atmosphere at Dylan & Co. shifted from tense to collaborative. Jade saw it as the beginning of a culture change that would define the company's future. The most remarkable transformation was Dylan's genuine interest in making the company a place of inclusivity. He started promoting diversity initiatives, even organizing seminars on empathy and workplace respect. And to Jade's surprise, he even asked her to co-lead some of these sessions, recognizing her as a valuable voice and a leader within the organization. One morning, as they prepared for an upcoming presentation to the board, Dylan turned to her, his gaze earnest. "Jade, I want us to go beyond just making profits. I want Dylan & Co. to stand for something meaningful, something real," he said. "We've been focusing so much on image and exclusivity, but I think it's time we change that. What do you think about launching a line that's truly inclusive, something that celebrates all body types?" Her eyes lit up at the idea. It was something she had dreamed about for years, a vision she had kept to herself, believing that the company would never embrace it. But hearing Dylan say the words made her heart soar. "I think it's exactly what we need," she replied, a smile spreading across her face. "Imagine creating a line where people of all shapes and sizes can feel beautiful, where they don't have to try to fit into a mold but can embrace who they are." He grinned, taking her hands in his. "Then let's make it happen, together." As they worked on the inclusive line, they spent countless hours together, collaborating on everything from design concepts to marketing strategies. Their late nights at the office, once filled with stress and resentment, now turned into moments of laughter, shared ideas, and quiet glances that spoke volumes. It was in these moments, away from the polished presentations and boardroom discussions, that they truly fell in love. Their relationship felt both exciting and stable, a rare combination that made each day feel like an adventure they were embarking on together. Jade marveled at how much Dylan had changed, not just for her, but for himself. She saw him shedding the layers of arrogance and perfectionism, replacing them with humility and compassion. And in turn, she found herself letting go of her own insecurities, embracing her worth and talent with newfound confidence. One night, as they celebrated the final designs for the new line, Dylan took her hand and led her to the rooftop of the office building. The city lights stretched out before them, a beautiful mosaic of life and energy. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her as they stood in silence, taking in the view. "Jade," he murmured, his voice soft, "you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. I used to think success was about power and control, about standing above everyone else. but you've shown me that real success is about connection, about lifting others up." She looked up at him, her heart full. "And you've taught me that it's okay to stand up for myself, to demand respect. You've shown me that love doesn't mean losing myself, but finding someone who makes me better." He smiled, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I love you, Jade," he whispered, his voice filled with a depth of emotion she had never heard before. "I love you too," she replied, her voice steady and full of certainty. In that moment, they knew that their love was more than a fleeting romance. It was a partnership, a union built on trust, respect, and a shared vision for the future. With the launch of the new inclusive line approaching, Jade and Dylan poured their hearts into the project. The line was a groundbreaking collection that embraced diversity, celebrating every shape, size, and background. They featured models from all walks of life, each one embodying the message of self-love and acceptance. The campaign's slogan, "Beauty Beyond Boundaries," captured the essence of their vision, a commitment to reshaping the industry's standards. The launch event was unlike any other Dylan & Co. had held. Instead of the usual high-profile guest list, filled with celebrities and influencers, they invited employees, community members, and advocates of body positivity. The room was filled with genuine smiles, laughter, and stories of self-acceptance. It was a celebration of people, of diversity, of beauty in all its forms. Jade watched with pride as Dylan gave his speech, a heartfelt message about his journey from arrogance to understanding, about his commitment to making the industry more inclusive. He acknowledged the mistakes he had made, the people he had hurt, and his dedication to becoming a better leader. The line was a resounding success, not just because of its aesthetic appeal, but because it resonated deeply with people. Dylan & Co.'s transformation became a beacon of hope, a symbol of change in an industry that had long been dominated by narrow standards. In the weeks that followed, Jade and Dylan continued to work together, guiding Dylan & Co. with a renewed sense of purpose. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day, their love grounded in the shared journey they had embarked on. They were partners in every sense, supporting each other's dreams, challenging each other to grow, and celebrating each other's successes. Years later, Dylan & Co. stood as a pioneer in the fashion industry, known not only for its luxury and style, but for its values of inclusivity, respect, and empowerment. Jade and Dylan, now co-leaders of the company, had built a legacy that was far greater than either of them could have imagined. Their love had become the foundation of a movement, a powerful reminder that true success was about making a difference, about lifting others up. Jade often looked back on her journey, reflecting on the person she had been when she first started at Dylan & Co., the pain and resentment that had once driven her. She realized that her quest for revenge had been transformed into something far more meaningful, a journey of forgiveness, growth, and love. And Dylan, once the arrogant CEO who had been blind to his flaws, had become a man she was proud to stand beside, a partner who had shown her the power of change and the beauty of second chances. Together they had built something that would last, a legacy of kindness, compassion, and empowerment that would inspire future generations. And as they looked out over the company they had built, hand in hand, they knew that their story was only beginning. A story of love, transformation, and the power of believing in each other. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe.